Well, it's now 10 years since an incident rocked Kenya and our continent. A group of armed men stormed into the Westgate Shopping Mall in Kenya. They started shooting people, throwing grenades into crowds of people. On the roof of the shopping mall, there was a children's cooking competition underway. People had to run for cover when gunmen threw grenades into the crowd there. The group that did this was called Al-Shabaab. It's linked to Al-Qaeda. In the end, it took 4 days for the security forces to be able to take control of the shopping mall. Again, many people were killed. Gordon Kachola is an international relations expert. Was a journalist in Kenya at the time of the attack. Gordon, good afternoon to you. I remember this event quite clearly. I couldn't believe a shopping mall had been attacked in this way. It was horrific to watch, even from so far away. I mean, you must remember what it was like, almost yesterday.
Well, Steve, those are some of the most terrible memories one could have. It is 10 years now, but having memories of the Westgate Mall attack, it appears like it was yesterday, because having covered the event, that terrible deal for 4 straight days, it was so terrible to speak about it even.
The group that did this, Al-Shabaab, they were linked to Somalia. They were angry that Kenyan troops were in Somalia. What did they really want? I mean, why did they want to kill so many people?
At times it becomes a little bit difficult to understand this amorphous group called Al-Shabaab, because we are clearly dealing with an ideological kind of group, a group that do not want to clearly show their face, but would want to let people feel their pain they inflict. The reason as to why they do this changes from time to time. So we can't really put our hands on a particular issue and say this is why they are doing it, because even if you rectify something you think is a reason as to why they are doing it, or you do it better, the next time they still find an excuse. So it is not something we can clearly say this is why they do it. They do it to satisfy themselves in the most awkward manner human beings should be living.
So, I mean, in Kenya it must have had such a big impact. I mean, the fear, the horror of it. So many people must have known people who were affected, who were killed. I mean, it must have had a big impact there for a long time.
Well, the fear was there at the initial stages, but thanks to the resilience by Kenyans, we've come to accept that this is something that we might have to live by, and thanks to the security agencies around that took the most credible measures so far to ensure that such an incident do not occur again. But at that time, yes, it was such a fearful moment for Kenyans. Kenyans lived in fear for quite some time, but with time, Kenyans are quite resilient, and they overcame, I can say they overcame, though with much of caution they took.
And Gordon, the capacity of the Kenyan government, of the army, of the military and the police there, has that been improved since this attack? I mean, are people now better able to deal with something like this? And this gets to the heart of a sort of response to terrorism in Africa, really.
Well, clearly, we've seen a number of terror attempts thwarted in Kenya. That is a clear indication that the responsible bodies or agencies, security agencies, have done what they can do to foil any further attack. At times, it slips off our hands, but in many attempts, they have been thwarted. So it clearly indicates the progress that the Kenyan security agencies are making towards possible zero terror attacks within Kenya.
These groups like Al-Shabaab, I mean, they really pose a threat to democracy in some places. It's because of what these groups have done in places in the Sahel, quite far from Kenya, but they've had such a big impact on some parts of Africa. How do you think democracies like Kenya should respond to this kind of terrorist group? Are there lessons from Kenya for the rest of us about how democracy should respond to this kind of terrorism?
Well, it poses a big challenge. That is a fact we must agree with, that it poses quite a huge challenge to many democracies, not just Kenya alone, but you can even remember Somalia was a thriving democracy at some point, but these things in the name of terrorism. Go to Sahel, go to the southern part of Africa in where they wreaked havoc the other day. I think dealing with this would mean total collaboration in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of putting together resources to fight these amorphous groups, not just Al-Shabaab alone, but any other terror group that would emerge within or outside Kenya, so to say. The surest way is to share intelligence, number one, by other states, to also pump in resources that will enable countries that are under threat by these Al-Shabaab and such kind of groups to ensure that whenever such attacks happen, they thwart them. The intelligence helps to thwart them before they happen. The aspect of resources will help the intelligence aspect. So it is a two-way traffic. Bring in intelligence, then bring in resources to ensure that in the event that we have credible information, intelligence, there is enough resources to deal with the particular situation that arises. So we got to share a lot. Democracies, you can't do it alone. Many democracies must pull together for purposes of dealing with terrorism. As it is, it's also changing in phases day in, day out.
In our country, we don't give nearly enough money to the South African National Defence Force. And we have debates about whether we should give them more money or whether we should spend more money on things like social grants for children, for example. In your country, in Kenya, after an event like this, did you find that more people were suddenly supporting the army, that the army was suddenly something people wanted to really strongly support?
Well, matters of security sometimes become a little bit slippery because you may not know how much is pumped in, how much is not pumped in. But I would urge any other democracy out there that the best thing to do is to first safeguard your country, the borders of your country, the people. Ensure you safeguard them. Then you will be proud to be a member of a state that you are very sure about its security. Whereas there are deficits, so to say, in security operations, it leaves a country vulnerable. So there is a need, not just for Kenya, not just for South Africa, but any other democracy outside there, to ensure that security dockets are heavily funded so that because you cannot develop, you cannot do any other thing, you cannot talk of food security, you cannot talk of proper development if you are not secure. So the first fundamental issue here must be security, so that any other thing comes second.
Gordon Katrola, thank you. International relations expert. Someone, of course, who remembers that attack on the Westgate Shopping Mall in Kenya 10 years ago so clearly.